We have Azuka, Chief Executive Officer from Africa Resource Center. We have Sanjay Sethi, Senior Vice President from Technopak. We have Tuğrul, President of Supply Chain Management Association, TEDAR. We have Gary, Chief Commercial Officer from Neutral Fuels. And we have Shanmukh Singh, Consultant at Institute of Supply Chain Management. I would request Shanmukh to kindly lead the discussion ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're attending from today. I would like to thank all the speakers who have participated at Supply Chain MENAT Webvent, and also the large number of attendees who participated on both the days. Supply chains are complex. There's a reason why supply chain professionals say short supply chains are the best supply chains. Because as the supply chain gets longer, complexities multiply exponentially. While the saying might be true, the same cannot be said about its practicality. To understand this, supply chain professionals need to develop a cross-disciplinary approach to supply chain design. A cross-disciplinary approach can help us map the how, when, and why of disruptions in our supply chain and hence allow us to mitigate or manage risks. This brings me to the topic of the day, ESGQP in supply chain, building a responsible, resilient, and sustainable supply chain. I've taken certain liberties in modifying the original ESG acronym to better suit the current discussion. Let's move on to ask some pressing questions to our esteemed panelists. I would sincerely appreciate if the answers can be limited to 2 to 3 minutes per question. So the first one for the day is for Sanjay Sethi. How do we design our supply chain around the much larger concept of sustainability?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Shanmukh. It's a very important question and also timely because now the businesses have been disrupted. We have all experienced that. So this is a great, I would say, blessing in disguise that we get an opportunity and buy-in from not only people from our own company, but also from our supply chain partners to redesign it. Earlier, whenever we wanted to talk about a policy, people felt that we were disruption to their day-to-day business. Today, if we say that we have redesigned a policy, people really want to hear as to what is there in our hat as a solution that which can solve their problems. So today, we can actually begin from the beginning, from the scratch. We can say that we will start afresh by saying to our supply chain partners that, look, all of you and all of us are not on the same pedestal. We all have different learnings and different understandings of what the supply chain and its sustainability should be. Let us look at where we are and then see, are there any simple things that we can do in our life? So the lighthouse for me is different from the lighthouse from my one supplier, and he is different from the second supplier, and we all have our own agendas as to what we can achieve. Like, for example, there is one supply chain partner who thinks that his supply chain still has some child labor left, so he has to work on that. Another partner thinks that I have to still take care of reducing the carbon footprint by doing some simple steps. The third one thinks that while I don't have much opportunity to reduce, but I can definitely go and plant the trees. The fourth one thinks that I want to include women more and more in my supply chain. Fifth one thinks that I want to train them, reskill them. So like this, everybody has different SDG to impact, and they have their own agendas, and they all come and culminate into our agenda, because we are focusing on not just one or two SDGs, we are focusing on all the 17 SDGs. So by working with our supply chain partners as to this is our supply chain policy, and if you can also emulate that, and what is the best idea to encourage them to emulate is by being the example ourselves. So if we implement those small little baby steps in our own supply chain and demonstrate the benefits, and if those benefits also have some financial benefits, that sort of sets up a very good backdrop for them to understand. So I would say that let us redesign the supply chain by looking at the immediate next steps where we have the maximum buy-in and be the best example ourselves by showing it to our supply chain partners that this is something that we are talking about, and we are not going to do audit. It is something like a self-audit, or it's an assisted audit, so that you feel that nobody is policing it you, or nobody is trying to overlook your shoulders as to what you are doing and how you are doing. One example that I would like to give here is sustainable agriculture production. Right from Unilever to any other agriculture company and food company is talking about sustainable agriculture production. We all have the code ready. Some of the farmers already know how to implement it, and the rest are being prepared, trained, and supported by various companies and supply chain how to get into the path. But it is also a reality that in case of palm oil, there's a lot of sustainable oil which is being produced, and it has got no takers in terms of premium. So it is being sold as a normal sustainable palm oil. So that means there is a need to also educate the consumer as to how it is different. For example, if I'm producing rice with 1 kilogram of rice consuming 2,500 liters of water, and if I go to the customer and I say that, look, this is a sustainable rice and it will produce 1 kilogram of rice by reducing the water footprint by 1,000 liters. So you save 1,000 liters of water if you buy my rice. So I'm sure if not 20% or 30%, maybe the customer will be ready to pay a small premium. So I think there is a work that needs to be done in that direction. So then we can then encourage the whole supply chain by giving them incentives that you will have either more premium or at least more stickiness with your customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, for answering the question and helping us understand how to integrate sustainability in our supply chains. Moving on to Azuka Okeke, who I request to answer the same question, but with a focus on sustainability in terms of human resources in healthcare supply chains.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think Sanjay already did a great job in kind of bringing us to the issue of not just about the redesigning, but also about leading by example, which is more like responsible supply chain. I think when you talk about health and what is going on now in terms of even with the pandemic, you see that this calls for a redesign if we're looking at this whole idea of responsible, or I would even say the redesign of supply chain to move from transactional to transformational. If we remain at the transactional phase of supply chain, where it's more about the bottom line, you cannot impact health in that direction, because when you talk about what we're trying to achieve with the SDGs, you need to integrate both the environmental and the social and even the legal impact of what is happening all around us within the supply chain. And if you go to the human resource for that, you see that who are the ones, and you're talking about health, I'm not talking about the fashion industry where we see a lot about the child labor and all. But if you come to the health, you find that one major thing that should keep us in focus when we're talking about transformational is, what are we trying to achieve? What is the health outcome we're trying to address? Till date in Africa, the major challenge we're facing with regards to health is under 1 mortality rate and maternal mortality rate. That still defines our economic structure in Africa. As long as women are dying in childbirth, as long as children are dying in Africa, then the major challenge we're going to face is that our supply chain systems, whether in the industry or in the healthcare system, is not efficient. And why are they dying? We talk about who are the ones making decisions. What is the governance structure to make decisions for supply chain? That calls for a reimagining of supply chain. By tradition, most of the people at the C-suite, most of the decision makers in supply chain, in health supply chain, have on their head the transactional supply chain system: profit, product, sales. But if we're looking at this direction of transformational, then we must make sure that the decision makers understand what needs to be done to reduce those health indices. Only a woman, I would always say, can understand the pain, the real pain, when it comes that many women and children are dying at that rate in Africa. That means that we need to balance the decision making in Africa for supply chain. That says that we cannot have a responsible supply chain if we have on our heart the transactional supply chain, cost being the key driver for supply chain improvement or supply chain performance. Transformation, reimagining, redesigning, looking at the issues around the social impact must be the key driver. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Azuka. Next, I would like to make an interesting inference or observation. Our environment is said to be comprising of everything around us, and every little thing around us is a part of a supply chain, which essentially means supply chain and environment go hand in hand. But are we considering the environment while charting out the design of our supply chain? Unfortunately, most business today don't consider it. Having said that, let's assume we were to consider it. Do we stand to benefit from it, or will it just pile up as an additional cost to our businesses? This prompts me to my second question of the day. How can environmental sustainability initiatives help us drive sustainability in various functionalities across our businesses? Tuğrul, can I have you on this first?
Yes, thank you. Also, thank you for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much also to my colleagues who contribute to this webinar. So very shortly, in my opinion, I mean, it should be also not just limited with the environment. When we talk about sustainability, we should also touch all the three Ps. So in my opinion, sustainability initiatives are to be essential part of this company strategy. It should be also based on the values. It can't be limited with one corporate unit or one business unit. So, for example, I was also head of sustainability in Turkey a couple of years ago. We had published a business to society report covering really all the aspects. For example, including strengthening the economy, driving innovation, improving quality of life, developing local jobs, certainly also, which also included environment and sustainability towards being a carbon neutral company, energy efficiency, contribution to renewable energy, etc., etc. So we were also integral part of this project as supply chain, as was that time I was also the head of supply chain. So also, I mean, going forward, companies purchasing volumes equals roughly 40 to 70% of the total revenue, which also brings a huge responsibility to supply chain organizations. So human rights, employees, health and safety, environmental protection. So also when we look at the UN Global Compact document, it mentions that supply chain can make a significant impact in promoting human rights, fair labor practices, etc. So in this regard, supply chain also based on the impact of our department as supply chain, as mentioned before, we can really contribute. So what we have as CMAS, we do have a so-called code of conduct, which each and every supplier has to sign when they would like to make a business with us. It covers human rights, labor practices, so prohibition of forced labor, child labor, health and safety, certainly environment, including etc., etc. So it has to be an integral part, as mentioned at the very beginning of the company strategy. So supply chain has to also contribute without having any let's say how would you call it without ignoring this policy as supply chain. You can't you shouldn't be able to do any business. It is also mandatory, as mentioned before, in our company, that we have to sign with the suppliers together the code of conduct whenever we do a business with them. They have to obey the rules accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuğrul. Gary, could you take up the same questions but answer more with some examples from the mobility industry, since you come from that background?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for my esteemed panel colleagues here with their inputs. I've heard several really important statements in the last few moments. I've heard about collaboration. I've heard about sustainability, and in my world, and I've spent the last 30+ years managing global supply chains, defining global supply chains, encouraging manufacturers to source their goods from the lowest cost countries in the world. From black and white T-shirts out of China 35 years ago, through Porsche, holding inventory in desperate locations and flying parts overnight for VOR, through the likes of Dell and their managed inventory programs and merchant transits. And for the vast part of my 30 years in supply chain with the likes of DHL and Geodis and Maersk Logistics, we were creating the problem. We were encouraging people to have longer supply chains, not to near source, not to invest in their own manufacturing economies, not to give jobs to local people, but really to source from as far away from the end consumption market as was possible. So, those of us who've been around long enough in the global supply chain, we created a great deal of the current challenges and behavior that comes with those challenges a long time ago. Now, I've spent the last few years, it's good afternoon for me, I'm based in Dubai, so many of you would call that maybe the viper's nest in terms of sustainability, the capitals of the world in terms of fossil fuels. But my company, we collect used cooking oil, not virgin cooking oil as Sanjay referred to, and we convert that into fuel. And our biofuel serves environmentally sensitive clients, the likes of IKEA, who have a very strong CSR focus, something that they live and they breathe in, just the same as Tuğrul explained with Siemens. We work very closely with the FMCG organizations, again, the Unilevers, again, the Nestle's, people who are very, very serious about globally reducing their carbon footprints. And, certainly over the last couple of years, the whole reality of reducing your carbon footprint, but whilst maintaining your competitive edge and keeping your cost base in check, all of which is being sustainable, operationally, financially, environmentally, have become really, really brought to the forefront of many, many boardrooms. And I'm really pleased to see that a lot of these big organizations are not only just talking about it, or offering up offset schemes, carbon credit schemes, government incentivized schemes. They're physically doing something about it. They're nearshoring, so therefore their transportation lines are shorter, therefore using less air freight, less sea freight, less road freight, less warehouses. So they're physically reducing the amount of carbon and poisonous gases that have been put out there into the atmosphere. They're finding newer ways to manage the transportation they do have to use, be it electric, running facilities on wind farms, on solar energy, using aqua, using water to generate power. And a lot of these initiatives are in some of the poorer countries of the world that are not only creating jobs, but creating skills, but they're also supporting the environment in a very positive, proactive way. So, it fills me with joy, as a career logistician, poacher turned gamekeeper, now convincing the industry to reduce their carbon footprint, to travel less, to do less kilometers, less miles, to use a biofuel or electricity driven vehicle, and to save the environment. As well as anything else, I'm a father of two, and I'd like my boys, when they get married and they have children, grandchildren, to have the world that we've almost destroyed with our our thirst for cheap commodities made as far away from the end consuming market as possible. You know, I'd love to see their grandchildren employed in the industries by which the products that they purchase. And again, you know, the big retailers, the big FMCG organizations, they know this. They know that today's consumer not only looks at the price point and the quality, they look at the behavior of the manufacturer in terms of their sustainability. You know, people do not just go to IKEA because they like the meatballs, or they like to go to a very nice blue and yellow shed. People choose, consumers choose their behavior based on the environmental footprint, the environmental approach that many of the large global manufacturers and retailers now take. So, you know, when we see tenders from our customers coming across the table to say somebody needs to do a distribution network and a sustainability element is high up on the agenda, be it a biofuel, be it a solar panel installation for a new facility, then that really does fill my heart with joy. You know, and my message for all of the people attending today is it's possible, it's active, it's here today. You can not only save money and create jobs and reskill your workforce, but you can help support and save the environment at the same time.
Thank you, Gary. As Tuğrul said and Gary illustrated, sustainability is certainly an intersection where planet, people, and profitability issues meet. Moving on to the societal aspect of our discussion for today, business
Shanmukh,
only.
may I have additional input? Very brief. So we do today consume 3 times more than compared with what we should consume actually. As a person, private person, or as a corporate, we really should take care of because of our children, because of parents or grandchildren, etc., etc. Thank you. Sorry for interruption.
Reduce, then reuse and recycle. That's true. That's true completely. Moving on to the societal aspect of our discussion for today, businesses have only just started looking at CSR as an important part of their business function. Some businesses go big on CSR, but is enough being done on this front? Unfortunately, the answer to this too is a big no. But rather than reflecting on our past actions, I would like to ask an interesting open question to the panelists today. This will be the first open question for the panelists. Whoever would like to take up this question is free to do so. Can businesses help us build circular societies of the future where multi-stakeholder collaboration is norm? And what role does supply chain as a business function have to play in all of this?
Let me just add a couple of points, if I may, on that, Sanjay, and then maybe you can come in. I think from a sustainability perspective, the whole concept of a circular economy or a circular environmental economy is the holy grail of what we're all looking for. You know, I can give you examples of how we operate here in Dubai with McDonald's. You know, everybody knows McDonald's. I dare say we have all been to McDonald's. We've taken our children to McDonald's and our grandchildren to McDonald's. You know, McDonald's approached our industry sort of 10 years ago, and said, we generate an awful lot of waste. We generate a lot of waste oil, waste cooking oil from our fries, from our chicken McNuggets. And we are worried where that oil goes. If it goes into the drainage network, then that's a problem for the infrastructure of the country. If it goes, dare I say, into the black market and gets repurposed, then it becomes a carcinogenic product and it can damage people's health. So not only were they looking at the environmental impact of their waste streams, but they were also trying to step into some very solid governance about what happens to the produce once it leaves their premises. And you know, they were the reason for our organization setting up here in Dubai, when they recognized that the technology was available then, 10 years ago, as it is today, to convert that waste stream into pure fuel. So in talk of collaboration, you have a McDonald's, a generator of waste. You have an organization such as ourselves at Neutral Fuels that can refine that waste into a biofuel. You have their logistics partner here who runs a fleet of collection delivery vehicles on their behalf. And you have the manufacturer of the vehicles that will consume the pure net zero carbon free fuel that's ran over 15 million kilometers since inception of that concept. So that is a very solid profitable for the logistics organization and for McDonald's, environmentally circular supply chain, including manufacturers, retailers, FMCG clients, and logistics partners. They do it here. We have several other examples of clients who do things similar in other parts of the world who we've certainly worked with. So to answer your question, yes, it is possible. Sanjay, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. It's very interesting point you have raised. Shanmukh, my views are slightly different on this subject because I feel that the entire dialogue and the entire platform of the sustainability agenda has been captured by, actually, unfortunately, by most of the polluters themselves. And it is also a truth that they also have the maximum knowledge on this subject, because those who are not polluting so much, actually they have not really kept up the pace and actually have not really understood that how the things should be done and how things can be done and how the things are going to be done and where is the money for sustainability and the green bonds and all that. So that is why if you see that in the Eastern world, there's a very little uptake on the green bonds and things like that, except obviously China. You see that most of these organizations, whether they are throwing waste or they are indulging into any such practices, they are waiting for a Tesla moment. Like what Tesla did to the automobile industry, it totally upset the industry. Now we are just waiting for another 10 years to go and the entire industry will be changed forever. So now why do a Tesla has to come and change the industry? That's the question that we have to ask. Whether these polluters who are throwing away bottles on the street, or these polluters who are throwing away packaging on the street, or these polluters who are getting into unsustainable practices, or they are presenting a lot of chemicals on our plate which we are consuming day by day, or they are the ones who are actually causing or promoting a lot of waste. All these companies are actually waiting for a Tesla in their industry to come and upset them. There are no radical changes. There are only very small, I would say, cosmetic changes. And as Tuğrul said, that guys really understand. We are not moving forward. We are actually moving slightly backward. It is now 3 times, and the kind of effort which is required is a lot more. Yes, there is a lot of talk. Yes, there are good initiatives. All this is fine. All the speakers, what they have said is also truth. But there's a bigger truth about the whole thing, that we are not moving forward. There's lot of degeneration which is still happening in various parts of the world. Just to give you an example, Azuka is here, and if I ask her, okay, what is the blueprint of Nigeria, or what is the blueprint of African countries to get over the food security problem, probably the answer would be more chemicals, more fertilizer, because the way the India has polluted its way into it is coming out of the food security mess. And we say, oh, it was a green revolution. But let's ask ourselves, was it really a green revolution, or was it a pesticide and fertilizer revolution? So I think there is a learning for Africa there, that it does not have to ape and follow how others grew. It can actually be more sustainable and yet feed the people. Those kind of solutions are not being presented on the table by the supply chains, because all these supply chains are divided into 2 parts. A, very profitable companies, those who have very strong brands, and B, which are the commodity brands or commodity companies, or the not so well known names. It is the second part which is the largest part of the supply chain, and not the brand part. And the second part operates on a very wafer thin margin. If they steal any electricity, they pass on the benefits of that electricity charges to the customers. They really work on a very wafer thin margins, and they do not have any ability to bring any change, because the moment they go and tell to their suppliers do this, do that. Supplier says, okay, get lost. I will rather sell it to someone else, because they are also operating on a wafer thin margin. The only change which could have been brought was by the brands, but are they doing enough? So are they actually going and auditing their suppliers? What is the major change behavior they have seen in their suppliers case? Have their packaging become sustainable, or is it just the oxy biodegradable, or is it really biodegradable? So I think those are the big questions which we need to be asking from those big companies who have the ability to bring in a change and not let the whole world fall into the same trap as it was in the last 10 or 20 years, that we really polluted our ways into development. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Also,
I don't know if I could.
Just a second, Azuka. I'll
Sorry,
come back for this.
Okay.
Just a reminder, guys, we are running very tight on our schedule. I know you're making all important points heard, but let's keep it short. That we are on a tight schedule. Azuka, you can answer.
So I think one of the things I think I saw somebody put on Twitter, I think it's Deborah Daw, who is all about secularity. One of the things she said is, how would it be so cool if we could get manufacturers to take a code of do no harm? You know, some of us that are in the medical field, when you're leaving school, you have to take a code of do no harm in your, so that kind of is in you, that no matter what, how you're practicing, you have that code of, hey, do no harm. I think that is one of the things that we need to start pushing, particularly in Africa. And Sanjay said it, you know, the challenge is that it's not on the table. The supply chains are not bringing practical solutions on the table. It's been very cosmetic, you know, very fun topics, secularity, sustainability, looking at the waste, but no real practical solution to put on the table for companies to abide by, and also to make it regulatory, where we make it standard, the CSR for these companies. For instance, in the pharma companies in Nigeria, or even in the industry for transportation in Nigeria, you could have one state or one district, as you call it, and they have the same health facilities, and you could have 5 trucks, I tell you, going the same day, half empty, moving commodities that one truck could have moved. You can imagine the carbon footprint, you can imagine the waste, the financial waste. And we have what we call a spaghetti supply chain system in our health system, where so many people just work in a silo, moving things in this, and that's why part of the reason why we have very bad roads, because as you're trucking, you're just, you know, degrading the system. And one of the things we started engaging the pharma industries to say, hey, you guys have a group, you have a corporate association, and you're moving in the same space. Wouldn't it be more profitable if you integrate, if you work in kind of mini groups when you are going to the same district, to share costs, share the transportation system? Start thinking in that direction. And also, wouldn't it be great if you look at it from the environmental aspect of your CSR? The waste in the city where I live in, Lagos, you don't want to Google that. The pollution is crazy, and we are all in it. And like Gary said, you would want a world where you would want your children to be able to live in without being swallowed by plastic. And we're living inside, literally inside plastic. So for me is, let's bring together practical solutions to the table and less cosmetic when we talk about circularity or sustainable. Practical solutions that companies can adopt. Thank you.
Thank you, Azuka. Coming to the most interesting inflection to this panel, the GQ. Geography, governance, and geopolitics all have a major part to play in promoting responsibility, sustainability, and resilience in our supply chains. Let's look at geography first. How does geography affect our supply chains, especially in the MENAT region, which has a strategically important geographical location? How can this advantage be used by businesses to differentiate on the basis of supply chain and in turn create a continuous competitive advantage for the region? Can I have Dr. Singh on this?
Hi, everybody. The bandwidth is low, so I won't keep my camera on right now. But can I be heard?
Yes.
In fact, the Gulf is a natural waypoint between Europe, East Asia, Africa, Central and East Africa. Transportation and logistics is a very important element that connect these countries to Europe, to East Asia, to Africa, to Central and East Asia, and even to the South Asia. These countries need to leverage on this particular geographical advantages to really integrate and increase the depth and the breadth of trade that happens between the world. And they can also be a very favored destination as they have been key hubs. In fact, Gulf logistically and financially is a bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. And to do this, I think it needs to attract businesses. It needs to attract businesses that would invest into building this particular connectivity routes across the globe and making this particular MENAT region a very important region between connecting different parts of the world. I think one of the things that needs to be done here is that this is a slightly geopolitically sensitive area. Also, if you look around this, but all this.
I think we have lost Dr. Rakesh. We'll come back to the same question in a while. What are the policy initiatives the regional governments can take to leverage the strategic sweet spot the region lies in, and how can businesses collaborate with governments to chart the way forward for supply chain and logistics industry?
I mean, I can talk.
Okay, go ahead.
So I can talk about some of the local government initiatives we're experiencing here in the UAE, in Bahrain, in the Kingdom, and Oman, because we have very close governmental relations there. And despite my comment earlier about this is the fossil capital of the world, the governments here really realised a long time ago that they needed to be environmentally sensitive and a lot more sustainable in how they're operating. So they do have some very strong focuses on sustainable building, on sustainable transportation. In Europe, the way they tend to deal with things is, and Sanjay mentioned green bonds, they tend to deal with a way of offsetting. As a purist, I think that's cheating. I'll be brutally honest. I think organizations that buy their way out of their carbon responsibility or their sustainability responsibility using money is cheating. I'm not an advocate of it. And also, governments that will fund that type of avoiding your sustainability responsibility, I'm not a huge fan of either. And again, we see a lot of that in Europe. We see a lot of targets set by the European governments for the automotive industry is a very good example. If the automotive manufacturers fail to meet their targets, they'll be heavily penalized. On the flip side of that, they will incentivize certain organizations to produce goods that are more environmentally sensitive. We talked about Tesla briefly, and hands up, our company, we drive Teslas as well. We try to live what it is that we're doing, based on being able to look each other and our children in the eyes to say we're trying to do the right thing. So I think the UAE is very strong. The environmental push here is certainly from the very, very top, from Sheikh Mohammed downwards to all of these people. They're great believers in building a future for not only the residents, but the expatriates that have now get to call this our home. I see the same happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They've got a huge change program there, and they're coming from a very difficult place in terms of relying on one on their oil. And two, on the subsidies that were given to the people that live there to pay for their utilities and their education. So all of these things in what traditionally you would call almost a third world approach have changed over the years. So, I see it in Bahrain where they are looking to ban the export of all waste. So waste here, one person's waste is another person's, fuel source. Certainly in our industry, headline numbers: 10 million litres of waste fuel leave the kingdom every single 30 days to go to Europe because they don't have the capability to manage their own waste supply chains to create their own fuel from it. I mean, how scary is that? We're giving away a precious resource to companies for profit to transport it, to increase the supply chain emissions that come with that, for another continent to reduce their carbon emissions. Things like that, I think, are crazy. They're historic. There is a cost implication to organisations that operate in those areas, but one by one, the governments, certainly within the GCC, are addressing this. And I hope that we see that, in other mature economies as well, such as Europe and the USA.
Azuka, did you have something to say?
Sorry, I keep going off the video because of internet connectivity. Okay, no, I think just to add on to what Gary said, I think one key thing here is that it's the role of both government and private sector to address the environmental issue regarding supply chain. Most times it looks as if it's something that maybe we look at it from the corporate angle. Well, is this big FMCGs or is this pharma companies that are driving the environmental risk, and the government is the regulator? But I think it's the change that we need to see is where we begin to look at this as a collaboration, and how can the government help the private sector to work in a way that they reduce the carbon footprint, but also remain profitable. It is very important that we look at it from that angle. And in that space, you need to we need to bring things to the table, like I said earlier, and just Sanjay. If we don't have that kind of mindset, change the mindset, the reimagining, and not look at it from the corporate versus the regulatory mindset, then we can come together and begin to find solutions that will benefit all the parties. And that's just what I think can drive some major changes.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Azuka.
I mean, in my opinion, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
In my opinion, I mean, there are many different players in the sectors where also government releases the related incentives. So first of all, the stakeholders in the sectors, they should really jointly discuss and come up with some suggestions towards governments and agree on the action items, 10 or 20 or 30, whatever, and discuss with the government, and then get the right incentives. What they really don't do, or they do very limited. So they do have really their own interest, what they would like to discuss with the government and the others as well. So they do not come up with a joint solution and propose something to the government, which I really miss. Thank you.
Very true, Tuğrul. Next is a question I've been itching to ask. Once, Kishore Mahbubani, a well-known voice on the subject of international relations, said, and I quote, "Geopolitics has no morality." This got me thinking, do we live in a globalized world as the people of this world would like to believe? Or do we live in a globally polarized world where globalization has been glorified for the benefit of a handful of people? Being a professional in supply chain industry, I also gave a thought to how globalization has disrupted our supply chains in both good ways and bad. But come this pandemic, globally, geopolitical immorality took over and caused not only disruptions, but we lost lives of innocent people to immoral acts of regional and global hegemonies. This brings me to the final question of the GQ. We certainly live in an increasingly bipolar world where two hegemonies rule the roost. With geopolitical tensions rising, supply chains are bound to face disruptions and thus increasing the complexity we will have to deal with. We were unprepared to tackle such issues this time around when our regional healthcare supply chains needed it the most. but how do we approach these situations going forward and ensure that under the facade of globalization, we do not end up on the weaker side of this two-faced coin?
May I come in, Shanmukh?
Sure, Sanjay.
So obviously the reference is to China and US, and the life is really changing now, especially with the very vocal criticism by the US president, and the formation of Quad, as you must have all noticed, that India, Japan, Australia, and US formed a so-called supply chain alliance, but China and the rest of the world sees it more like a military alliance and more like a alliance for various other, cooperation, and it looks like.
Just a second. That's simply because the US is not the. I would like to say that US is not a culprit over here. US is equally a culprit as China is. So people view the alliance as bogus in that sense of the term. You can continue. Sorry.
Yes, so like this is a very emotive and controversial issues, and you will see people almost, most of the people on this or that side of the debate, and suddenly the world is divided. And I'm looking for a lot of support from Tuğrul on this on this issue. That Günal will bail me out. But the fact is that if you have $9 trillion worth of economies, and the supply chain talking to each other, out of which $3 trillion is the trade because of the commodities and the goods, and $1 trillion is the trade because of the services. So I'm talking about Australia, Japan, and India. Guys, we are in for a major change. And then you bring in economies like Vietnam and Indonesia and possibly even Malaysia. So you would find that the world is going to change, and the supply chains will be totally transformed, and this would definitely mean that there will be new customers and new suppliers. It would also mean that there will be denial of buying from this or that source, and it will also mean the acceptance of positive affirmation of this or that source, and this is definitely a big disruption. One of the examples I can tell you is the Harley Davidson vehicles, the motorcycles, which were not finding their way to India so far, and now they have more than one way, so much so that they were allowed to enter and they shut their shop voluntarily because they find a better way in the form of a partnership with Hero Motorcycles in India. So that means that the preference is so strong that you get more than one way of developing your supply chain, and you finally go to a way which is more efficient one. So this is what the geopolitical is doing to the supply chains, and this is what would mean that the Chinese phones will be sold less and less in a country like India, and this is what means that some of the companies will indeed leave China and find their new home either in Vietnam, India, or some other country. And this would mean that even if India cannot export many goods to Japan, Japan would still want to buy more and more from India. And this is the new world that we have come in. And at the same time, sustainability definitely takes a backseat there, because nobody will ask questions as to how much is your carbon footprint and how much is your sustainability agenda and achievement. And I just had a glimpse of perhaps the next speaker, my friend Christopher Abraham, and he would definitely request him to. I would request him to talk about his pet subject of design thinking. So with that, designing the new supply chain, you would understand that a whole lot of new businesses are being created, and the existing ones are being decimated, because ultimately the total market is not growing. It is almost at the same rate, and a country like India contracting 10%, it is an alarming clarion call that if one bad news can do this, then what about the second and third that we don't even know about? So I think that while globalization is a good word, but the fact is that people are now very scared, and the countries are definitely looking at their own interest more than the global village. Thank you.
I think you are muted. Shanmukh.
Shanmukh, you can't be heard.
Sorry. Thank you, Sanjay. Coming to the last part of the panel, where we will be dealing with the supply chain people. How important is it for a supply chain to be people-centric, and how do we design a seamless bionic supply chain? Tuğrul, can I have your answer on this?
Yes, very short. I mean, people are our most important assets. First of all, I mean, on the company level, not just related with supply chain, because we have to think it as a whole, IT, HR, business units. We have to really value all people. We have to have the best people on board. We have to also have lean structures in the companies, because whenever you would like to have the best people on board, you have to have modern systems in place regarding organization structures and working principles, etc. So if we have that, we have to then hire or develop our guys according to the world-class levels. Also, certainly, what is very much in the last time highlighted is digitalization. Also, we have to have the best people on board, also with the certain roles and responsibilities in the organization. As mentioned at the very beginning of this panel, we are really generating up to 70% of the revenue. We are at that important function in the companies. We have to also make sure that the colleagues around us are also aware of it. And therefore, we can then hire the best ones, collaborate, communicate. Certainly what we don't do is we don't purchase for ourselves. We do purchase for the company. So we have to align with our guys, integrate also the updated tools, processes in the organization, and work accordingly. People are the most valuable assets of the company forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuğrul. Moving on. A pressing issue in the supply chain industry, since we lack diversity, we lack women participation. I would like to call upon Azuka to answer this question. How important and effective is increasing diversity and women participation in our supply chain?
Thank you very much. There was something Tuğrul said at the beginning. He said, you need to make sure that any strategy you want to use in leading the organization, that you put it in there at the first part of your planning. Everything that has to do with diversity has to be part of your strategic direction. It has to be purposive. It's something that you don't just wake up and say, oh, I have a panel of 4 men and a woman. Why? You know, you need to make sure that at the very beginning, at the heart of your business design, you're thinking about diversity. You're thinking about not just about the gender diversity. You're looking at even the geography of diversity, depending on who are your beneficiaries. Whenever I look at our health system, whenever I look at Africa and public health, we have for a very long time depended on foreign aid. This is similar to India. And when you talk about the aid, the international donor support, which has really helped, I mean, a lot of lives saved. But then what happens in that regard is that with more in international aid, what then happened was less government funding. And with that, whoever that is bringing the money makes the most decision, makes most of the decision. So if the decision in terms of your supply chain design is made in Seattle, is made in Boston, most times it is not applicable in Nigeria. So that is why many people will say, well, billions and millions of dollars have been spent in so many African countries. Why haven't we seen the changes we have been looking for? One of the major reasons is that Africa is not funding its own health. So if we're getting funds from the international aid agencies and they are making the decisions with how the money will be spent, then that brings in that issue that we need to address. We need to be purposive in Africa in terms of diversity. Our governments must spend more and make most of the decisions, and then the international donors have to be co-funders and not the main funders. That begins to address most of the issues we're having in public health in Africa. Then we talk about the gender. Again, what makes a case for more women in the space or in the C-suite or decision making? It's not because it is good to see. It's because in health, our health indices, the poor health indices that drive our economy, is mostly hinged on vulnerable women and children. We still have women and children dying in Africa. That means we need to rethink how we're making decisions in terms of design. So again, it's not always about let's just have more women in the space. It's always about who are the beneficiaries and how will decisions we make impact the customers. So in that space, you may need to have more women to make decisions. And finally, really, we know that supply chain, particularly at the decision making level, needs more soft skill. When we're talking about the supplier demand relationship, network visibility with networking and globalization and how to improve local manufacturing and all, there are certain soft skills and also certain tactical skills that more women seem to have. So if you're looking at profitability and you've been doing business the same way, maybe for your transformation, you may go more with soft skills for leadership and consider more women. So I make a case for more women and I make a case for Africa decision making. Thank you very much.
Women certainly need to be present where decisions are being made. The pandemic has just illustrated this and highlighted this in a much better way. Most countries with women leadership have been doing great during the pandemic. So I second you on that, Azuka. Going to the last question of the day. How crucial is a holistic and cross-disciplinary approach to reskilling the supply chain people in order to achieve desired and optimal results? Can I have an academic?
Okay, very brief. As mentioned before, when you have an excellent working supply chain, which is also would be also valid for the other functions, where you can also
This question is from the academic perspective, before people join the supply chain, not after. How do we train our workforce to join the supply chain?
Yes, what I just wanted to mention. So if you have the image, this if you have the image as supply chain on the top level of the company, believe me, each and everyone would like to join you. Or if you have the image as a business unit, that you can hire anyone from each functional unit or other business units into your organization. We have to make sure that we really establish lean structure. We have the best people, lean processes, best way of working, or the new working principles, flexible working principles. We have good leaders in supply chain, so that each and everyone then would look forward joining your organization, which was the case also in our organization. I hired many guys from the business. Also, my guys were hired by the business because they were excellent guys. They were now heading some business units, etc., or joined other organizations as chief procurement officers of the other companies. So we have to work on the people. We have to invest in the people. Also, the people should also invest in themselves. Thank you. I can talk about more, but I can limit myself.
Okay, Tuğrul. So we've been very lenient, not lenient, I mean, we've been very good with our time. So I think I can have answers from both of you on this. Gary and Sanjay, if you want to contribute.
I can only say one thing, that skilling is a very expensive job, and it is best done by the customer, who can actually skill its own customers. So the supplier actually can do the skilling of the customer, and that's the most effective and cheaper way of providing that support. Because when you are making a profit, you have a interest in skilling your customers, and you are in a better position because the conversation is already taking place. It is something akin to if I go and want to buy a complex mobile phone, and the seller is too eager to actually show me one or two features of the new phone, because he knows at the end of the day he has made some profit on that. So I think reskilling has to be done by the suppliers. Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add to this, and Tuğrul really picked up on the point. I've been lucky enough to be involved in several graduate trainee schemes where we've gone into universities, gone into colleges, and actually explained to people what supply chain is. And again, those of us who've been around long enough will know that it wasn't called that to begin with. It was transportation or warehousing. There was just the different elements that became together to form a collaborative and a global holistic supply chain. So I have to say, in my career, some of the most enjoyable times is standing in front of those fresh-faced, wide-eyed individuals who thought they would traditionally have a career in banking or in one of the traditional industries, and to hear their questions and hear the excitement in their voices when they recognize that there is a real future in supply chain. Despite my wish for more near sourcing, globalization isn't going anywhere. Despite Trump's trade war with China, there will always be the necessity to source goods in varying continents around the world and then have the optimum cost-effective, sustainable supply chain. So, I've always highly recommended as a career for the youth to come into. If you're bright, if you're open to new ideas, if you're happy to travel and be outside of your comfort zone, it's a fantastic place for the youth to come into.
So the question is, how crucial is a holistic and a cross-disciplinary approach to reskilling the supply chain people in order to achieve desired and optimal results? The key points are holistic and cross-disciplinary approaches here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely it's crucial. We're talking about the supply chain for our future. If we're to see our grandchildren, like Gary said, you must have a program that incorporates environmental issues, a program that incorporates the social issues, social being responsible supply chain, and of course the legal aspect, ethics. It has become very key when you talk about the geopolitics. So you can definitely see that the previous programs, whether in the academic industry or even in the institutions, are inadequate. I, for one, when I'm trying to engage any experts in the field, I first of all look at the passion for change. You can train people on any technical skills, but if you're not passionate about what we're trying to achieve, the outcome, our currency in health is number of lives saved. If that is not your own currency, then we may not be able to work together. So those are the things that we need to look at as we're thinking of the technical aspects of supply chain operations improvements and continuous improvement. We must consider the softer skills as well, so that we have people with the right heart for the job. Thank you.
Also, I'd like to invite a special panelist for this question, since we have a bit of time, not much. Justin, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
I cannot see you.
Can you see me?
Have you heard the question? Have you heard the question?
You repeat it?
Yeah. How crucial is a holistic and cross-disciplinary approach to reskilling the supply chain people in order to achieve desired and optimal results?
I think it's very important in that supply chain itself is interdisciplinary, cross-departmental. I think that we touched on quite a few things in terms of diversity and inclusion, in that we need. I get a lot of pushback here in the States where I say that diversity and inclusion is more than just race. I think that it also includes, different geographical regions, because, I had a discussion with one individual, in the UK where, a white person on one part of the country they're treated differently than a white person in another part of the country. And the same thing in India, right? So in my opinion, it's more than race, and I think that those experiences, those backgrounds are very important to supply chain management. I think we've talked about the geopolitical aspects of everything, which is also important. But if we get to the different disciplines, for example, I think that if you have a blend, from a financial perspective, from a marketing perspective, from an engineering perspective, coupled with, that of supply chain management and logistics, I think you get that holistic approach. And I think that pre-COVID, I think that you're now able to see where supply chain management is a competitive advantage and not really an expense, as it has been previously seen. Also, I think that corporate social responsibility that we discussed is now seen as a competitive advantage as opposed to an expense. And there was a study that just came out, I think on the October 2nd, where Coyote Logistics said that 81% of organizations are more focused on sustainability than they were 3 years ago. And within that study, they said that corporate social responsibility, or sustainability, I should say, it has a positive impact on the return on investment in the area of cost savings, company reputation, and industry leadership, right? So if we just look at it from a supply chain perspective, I think that some people may miss that. Right, and I think that the biggest takeaway from my perspective is, we have to define, each organization has to define what's their definition of sustainability, because you're going to have different objectives for some organizations than you're going to have for other organizations, and I think that also addresses that cross-departmental, interdisciplinary function or question, that you asked.
That's great, Justin. Thank you for the answer. I think I don't know, maybe that was just oversight that the panelists had, but I think one of the most major fields today in supply chain is supply chain analytics, and we missed out the point that data science is an important discipline we need to focus on, because data is abundant in supply chains, and we need to use it correctly, and we need to use it rationally. Moving on to let's conclude the session. To conclude, I would say, as I see it, disruptions are here to stay, and so is complexity. Complexity is so high in normal times that when we face a disruption, complexities literally go through the roof, and the sky is the only limit then. I hear a lot of people saying disruptions are unexpected, and I agree with that. If it was expected, we could plan for it and sail through, and it would cease to be a disruption. What I don't agree with is that disruptions cannot be mapped. Certainly they can be, but we need to look beyond the conventional supply chain thinking. A jack of all trades here might be a much better bet to map these disruptions than a master of one. As I have said in my introduction, and it was also highlighted in the last question by all of you, we need to develop a cross-disciplinary approach to not only dealing with disruption risks, but also to manage complexity in normal times. Can we plan for a disruption? No. But we can design our supply chain to absorb the shocks of the disruption by building agile, resilient, secure, responsible, reliable, and most importantly, sustainable supply chains. To make effective strategy in the face of disruption and unprecedented uncertainty, leaders need to institutionalize strategic foresight, harnessing the power of imagination to build a dynamic link between planning, strategy, and operations. Managing the uncertainty of the future requires many tools, some of which may have similar or even overlapping functions. Backcasting in the present, contingency planning, crisis simulation, accurate and good quality forecasting, horizon scanning, scenario planning, trend analysis, and war games or stress tests are useful tools that help us navigate through complexity of uncertain, turbulent, volatile, and ambiguous times. It is precisely in this context of uncertainty in disruption phases that the real opportunities lie to gain competitive advantage through strategy and design. How to get started? As Tuğrul said, invite the right people to participate. Identify assumptions, drivers, uncertainties, and floaters. Imagine plausible but dramatically different futures. Inhabit those futures. Isolate strategies that will help you navigate the multiple possible futures. Implement these strategies and ingrain the process. It takes strength to stand up against the tyranny of the present and invest in imagination. Strategic foresight makes both possible and offers leaders a chance for legacy. Thank you, everyone. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Shanmukh. I think indeed a wonderful session and very interesting and very well justified to the new term ESGQP. So it was very interesting to hear all of you all, and